I've learned a number of labels, so I'm the fourth dimension now, and I'm a Gen Xer, so you're probably going to forget everything I said. Both Kristen and Kristen have covered much of what I was going to talk to you about, so I'm going to go off script for a little bit. But I wanted to first start just talking about my relationship with York University and Glendon and how it is that I came to be here and why I have such a love for Glendon. My parents emigrated to Canada from South America, a small country called Guyana, in the 60s. Most of you may remember the immigration policies of that time. My mother was a nurse. They were looking for nurses in the north, and so she, not knowing what she was getting into, moved to Sudbury in January of 1965. And if she were here, she has lots of great stories about that. But they ended up moving to Toronto. They had 3 of us. And how many of you are first-generation Canadians? So then you guys know this speech, right? I didn't come here for you to fool around at school, follow your friends. You are going to study. You are going to get an education, right? You got that? There you go. So we got that. All 3 of us were going to go to university, and that's what happened. And so here's how I came to know Glendon. I was in high school, went to a public high school in Etobicoke here in Toronto, and as was customary, I don't know if this happens now, just before you get to start thinking about university or post-secondary education, you go and see a guidance counselor. And so grade 11, I was marched down to the guidance counselor who said to me, what do you want to be? What do you want to be when you leave here? And my parents had appropriately brainwashed me to say lawyer, because like a good first-generation Canadian, I was going to be a lawyer. And so I said, I'm going to be a lawyer. And the guidance counselor kind of guffawed. He said, lawyer? He said, no. You should be a dental assistant. He said, we need more dental assistants. Maybe you'll get into college. And there's some good programs. And he gave me some brochures, and he said, so start thinking about that's a bit more realistic for you. And so I took that home, and my parents, you remember the cartoons where the smoke starts coming out of their ears? They lost their mind. So they frog marched me right back to school, and I changed to a different guidance counselor. That guidance counselor also happened to be my French teacher, and she knew I was doing well in French, and she said, I'm a Glendon alum. You should go check out this campus. You might like it. She also knew I wanted to, travel and just be out of my parents' house, and she said, they have a great residence. If you say you want to learn French, you may be able to get into residence. And so I came here, fell in love with it, applied, got in, and spent 3 wonderful years here. I was in residence, met a lot of wonderful people. It really shaped the way I think, the way I challenge myself, the way I listen to the views of other people. It's a phenomenal place. So that's just a background of me and Glendon. You probably heard that I'm living now in Chicago. So I work for a company in Canada with a US headquarters. I've always wanted to live somewhere else, and an opportunity came up to move to Chicago, so I did. It was a very different US when I moved there in 2015. I remember election night, I finally went to bed, and I woke up to my spouse pacing the floor saying, do we have to go back home now? Like, are we going back to Canada? But we've stayed. And Kristen spoke about the smugness that sometimes Canadians feel, and I agree. I mean, there's a certain smugness when things start going crazy in the US, you sort of think, well, I didn't experience that in Canada. It's not like that here. And as I reflected on this, I do feel a sense of pride, and I always want to start with that. I do feel a sense of pride of being Canadian. My parents are incredibly proud. They've been here, and they'll say, we're Canadian first. We've been here longer than we even lived in the country we were born in. But there is, and both Kristens have described, an equality that exists. We talked a lot this morning about economic disparity and the fact that socioeconomic disparity between certain groups that are acquiring and holding more and more of the economic wealth globally than others is going to be a huge problem globally. And we can see a microcosm of that happening in Canada, and I think it's a real concern. I think we've been saved from some of our socioeconomic fabric, our healthcare system, our social welfare system, some immigration policies that we've had. But if we're not careful, we're going to lose that. So why? And this is what I just want to talk a little bit and ask some questions, and I'm very interested in the dialogue after. Why? Why is this happening in Canada? We talked about the diversity. Chantal Hébert was talking about the fact that millennials have grown up looking around, and I grew up like this. Everybody, we're from different cultures. I grew up, understanding what Yom Kippur was. I grew up with people who spoke Hindu. I mean, I grew up in a world that was very mixed. But I today live in a company, or work in a company that is not, even when I was in Canada. I was the first executive of color at the organization. The law firm that I went to, the oldest law firm in Canada, I was the first black lawyer they'd ever hired. And if you go to that law firm today, and it's not different from any other firm, nothing's changed. So why? Why is it? My personal belief is I think it has a lot to do with our unconscious bias. And again, Kristen, you touched on this, and I want to talk about it a bit further if those of you haven't heard the term. So the idea is that we all have certain biases. We all formulate thoughts about things based on our experience, what we see, what we read, and a lot of it's unconscious. We don't even realize it. And I took a wonderful course, and I wish everyone could go through on unconscious bias, but I'm going to give you the example that our teacher gave us. He talked about, and this is an American who had come to Canada, and this actually happened in Canada. He was a runner, and he was running in downtown Toronto and was running through a parking lot and heard a scream. And he went to look, and the situation he saw was this. There was a white woman, professional woman, lying on the ground, bleeding. She was bleeding profusely. Standing over her was a black Somalian man, or might have been Eastern African man, looking down at her, and he was breathing very hard, looked in very shock, standing over her, and there was broken glass everywhere. And then he challenged the class, what do you think happened? Anybody want to guess? What would you think happened there? Well, I mean, you're right, that could have happened, but a lot of people would think there's an attack, right? And nobody wants to say it, right? Nobody wants to talk about it, but that's what people think. It's a man on a woman, the man attacked the woman, it's, black violence, etc. What really happened was that the woman was very irate, late, had come to, the black Somalian man was the parking attendant, and she had come to the parking lot, and she didn't have any money and wanted him to let her park for free. And he was trying to explain to her that his employer would not let her do that. She became very irate, banged on the window, broke the glass, cut herself, and fell down. That's a true story. But what we were talking about this class was, and it's a very simple story, an example is to challenge our unconscious bias. And we don't have conversations about unconscious bias, and we don't challenge it. And without challenging it, it's going to stay with us, and I'm not sure that we're going to have change. So, when we look around at our society, do we have a right to be smug that Canada is so much different from the US? We look around this room and this educational institution. Do we see the diversity and inclusion here that we should see, that we would see if we went down to Bloor and Yonge? Imagine in Canadian society if we were to change that. If, say, in 150 years we all met again and we actually had learned to embrace our diversity. We'd harnessed all of the raw talent that we're missing right now, the ideas and energies from communities that aren't represented and ignored. What are we allowing ourselves to miss, and why are we allowing ourselves to miss that? What if we as a country made a commitment over the next 150 years to partner with our Indigenous brothers and sisters to invest in education and socioeconomic betterment? What if we created classrooms and workplaces where everyone, truly everyone, despite language, sexual orientation, race, gender, ethnicity, we're truly encouraged and truly encouraged to excel and be truly rewarded equally for the fruits of their labor? When we talk about diversity these days, we talk about inclusion, and you heard Hubert talk about inclusion, and it is very important. I don't think you can talk about one without the other. And it's the idea that not only do you have diversity is just sort of checking the boxes. I've got a black woman, I've got a person in a wheelchair, but that people are actually included, that they're part of an organization, they're part of our community. But I don't think that's enough. And I want to talk about something I've been hearing a lot of people that work in diversity talk about, and it's a sense of belonging. So it's the idea that not only are people included, but they feel like they belong. And I think only when we feel like people belong and they feel like they belong that we're really going to see true change. I looked up the word belonging in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I have to tell you, after living through the last election, it's become my dictionary of choice. Belonging is defined as a close or intimate relationship, and I love the example. The example of the word in a sentence. Her adopted family gave the young girl a sense of belonging that she'd never felt before. So when we look about it in the context of our communities, we can't, I don't think, have a conversation about diversity without thinking about how we can ensure belonging. And that's what I hope we talk about, and hopefully we'll have a good discourse at the end of my talk here. But I really want to understand how we can move from diversity and inclusion to a real sense of belonging. I think that's, my wish for Canada at 150. Thank you very much.